The mining colony on Veldari wasn't Thomas Hayes's first choice of assignment, but the pay was triple what he'd make on Earth. As the lead engineer for Terran Minerals Corporation, he'd spent 6 months upgrading the colony's extraction systems, counting days until his contract ended. The planet's purple skies and floating rock formations had lost their wonder weeks ago. Thomas was deep in the maintenance shaft when the first explosions rocked the outpost. The emergency klaxons blared as he scrambled up the ladder, emerging into chaos. Smoke billowed from the administrative complex and colonists ran in panic as sleek, unmarked ships strafed the settlement. "Pirates," growled Jameson, his assistant, "or rebels. Either way, we're screwed." Thomas grabbed his toolkit. "Head for the bunkers," he ordered. "I need to check the core stabilizers, or this whole place could blow." Racing toward the power center, Thomas spotted a downed shuttle at the edge of the landing pad. Its elegant design marked it as Veldarian, not like the attacking ships. Curiosity overrode caution as he approached. The shuttle's hull was punctured with blast marks. Inside, Thomas found 3 dead Veldarian guards, their iridescent scales dulled in death. A 4th figure lay slumped in an ornate chair, still breathing, but barely. The Veldarian's regal attire was soaked with bluish blood from a wound in his side. "Hold on," Thomas murmured, assessing the injury. The alien's eyes, vertical pupils and amber irises, focused on him with surprising clarity. Thomas applied pressure to the wound, using medical supplies from the shuttle's emergency kit. The Veldarian spoke in a raspy voice, the translator at his throat converting his clicks and whistles to English. "Why? Help?" "Because you need it," Thomas replied simply, injecting a universal coagulant into the wound. "I'm no doctor, but this should keep you alive until your people find you." The Veldarian studied him with those unnerving eyes. "Your name?" "Thomas Hayes, engineer. Now be quiet and let me work." For 20 minutes, Thomas treated the wounded alien as explosions continued in the distance. Finally, the sound of approaching Veldarian troops reached them. Before they arrived, the injured alien pressed a symbol-etched medallion into Thomas's hand. "You have earned the gratitude of Zorkeleth," he whispered. Only when 6 heavily armed Veldarian soldiers burst into the shuttle, dropping to their knees before the wounded alien, did Thomas realize he'd been treating King Zorkeleth himself, the planetary ruler. The soldiers regarded Thomas with suspicion until the king spoke weakly, pointing to the medallion. Their demeanor changed instantly to one of deep respect. 3 days later, the colony was rebuilding. The attack, attributed to a rival alien faction, had been repelled, and Thomas had nearly forgotten the incident when a procession of ornate hovercrafts descended on the outpost. From the lead craft emerged a tall, striking Veldarian female. Unlike the king's blue-green scales, hers were a shimmering violet that caught the light as she moved. The elaborate headdress and ceremonial armor marked her as royalty. "I seek Thomas Hayes," she announced to the gathered colonists. Thomas stepped forward cautiously. "That's me." The female Veldarian inclined her head slightly. "I am Marivel, royal envoy. You have saved the life of our sovereign, invoking the sacred tradition of life debt. I just did what anyone would. The king has deliberated on how to honor this bond," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "He offers you his daughter, Princess Alara, in marriage." Thomas stared in disbelief as stunned murmurs spread through the crowd. I can't possibly." "Refusal would bring great dishonor to the royal family," Marivel stated. "The princess awaits your arrival at the palace in 3 days' time." She handed him an ornate scroll. "Instructions for the ceremony are detailed herein." As the envoy departed, Thomas stood frozen, the scroll heavy in his hands. His supervisor clapped him on the back. "Congratulations, Hayes. You've just become the first human to marry into Veldarian royalty." Thomas gazed at the receding hovercrafts, wondering what the princess thought of this arrangement, and what kind of mess he'd gotten himself into by simply trying to save a life. The royal palace of Veldara was a marvel of crystalline architecture, towers of translucent material catching the twin suns' light and fracturing it into kaleidoscopic patterns. Under different circumstances, Thomas might have appreciated its engineering brilliance. Instead, he stood awkwardly in ceremonial attire that the royal tailors had crafted for him, a blend of Terran and Veldarian styles that felt foreign against his skin. "The princess will see you now," announced a stern-faced attendant named Krell, who had made no effort to hide his disdain for Thomas since his arrival. Princess Alara stood at the window of her private reception chamber, her back to the door. Unlike the bluish scales of the king or the violet hues of Marivel, Alara's scales shimmered with an opalescent white that caught every color in the room. When she turned, Thomas was struck by the intensity of her amber eyes with their vertical pupils. "So," she said coldly, "you are the human who has entangled me in this situation." Her translator rendered her voice with crisp precision, though Thomas sensed the technology couldn't fully capture her contempt. "Princess Ilara?" Thomas bowed slightly. "I understand this isn't what either of us planned. For what it's worth, I had no idea saving your father would lead to this. And yet here we stand." She circled him slowly, assessing. "A human mate. How unprecedented." "I'm not looking to claim you as some kind of prize," Thomas said firmly. "In my culture, marriage is about partnership and choice." Ilara's head crest rose slightly, a sign of surprise Thomas had learned. "You speak as though you have a say in this matter. The life-debt tradition is sacred among my people. It cannot be undone. Then perhaps we can find a way to fulfill the tradition while respecting each other's boundaries," Thomas suggested. Before Ilara could respond, Dravek, the king's chief advisor, entered the chamber. His dark green scales seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Your Highness." He bowed deeply to Ilara, while ignoring Thomas completely. "The ceremonial preparations require your attention, and your intended must begin his cultural instruction immediately if he's to avoid embarrassing the royal house." Ilara's gaze lingered on Thomas. "Very well. See that he learns our ways, Dravek. But remember, he is to be treated as my future consort." As Thomas was led away, he caught Dravek's whispered words to another official. "The king's folly will end with this human's failure. No outsider can master our traditions." Over the next days, Thomas was thrust into an exhaustive program of Veldarian customs, language, and royal protocols. He noticed Ilara observing him occasionally from a distance, her expression unreadable. The turning point came during a diplomatic reception. Thomas was navigating the complex social hierarchy when he overheard two nobles speaking about him in Veldarian, unaware he'd been studying the language. "The princess deserves better than this primitive species," one sneered. Rather than react angrily, Thomas addressed them in perfect Veldarian. "Perhaps primitives like me have something to teach about respect and gratitude." The nobles retreated in embarrassment as Ilara approached, having witnessed the exchange. "You surprise me, Thomas Hayes," she said, offering him a ceremonial drink, the first time she'd acknowledged him publicly. "Perhaps there is more to you than meets the eye." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Thomas felt a surprising warmth radiating from her scales, a stark contrast to their cold appearance. For just a moment, something sparked between them that transcended their different worlds. "You're holding it wrong," Ilara sighed, adjusting Thomas's grip on the ceremonial scepter. "Like this, with your wrist angled precisely 40 degrees. 3 weeks into his crash course in Veldarian royalty, Thomas found himself spending increasing time with the princess as she personally corrected the shortcomings in his training. "Why does the angle matter?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The scepter represents the connection between royalty and the ancient crystal formations that gave birth to our civilization," Ilara explained. "The angle honors the first crystal that, according to legend, fell from the stars." Thomas nodded, intrigued. "On Earth, we have similar traditions connecting us to our origins, though we typically use less valuable objects. Over preparations for the upcoming solstice festival, they fell into a rhythm of cultural exchange. Thomas told her about Earth's oceans, something Veldari lacked, while she explained the complex social hierarchies that governed her world. "Your D." Species values individual choice above collective harmony, she observed one evening as they walked through the royal gardens. It seems chaotic. Sometimes it is, Thomas admitted. But there's beauty in that chaos, in the freedom to forge your own path. Ilara's crest rippled thoughtfully. I've never known such freedom. Every step of my life has been prescribed since birth. Including marriage? Thomas asked gently. She glanced at him, her pupils dilating slightly. Especially marriage, though I never expected it would be to someone from another world. During the solstice festival in the capital city, Thomas was accompanying Ilara through the crowded streets when a young Veldarian child fell from an upper walkway. Without hesitation, Thomas dove to catch the child, cushioning their fall and suffering a gash on his arm in the process. As royal physicians treated his wound, red blood so strange among the blue-blooded Veldarians, Ilara watched with newfound respect. You risked yourself for a child you didn't know, she said later in the privacy of the palace healing chambers. Thomas shrugged. Wouldn't anyone? No, she said simply. Many would calculate the political advantage first. You acted purely from compassion. That night, Ilara came to his quarters unannounced. The traditional boundary between them seemed to dissolve as she reached out, her cool fingers tracing the bandage on his arm. My people believe that bloodshed in protection of others creates a bond, she whispered. Their first kiss was tentative, an exploration of alien sensations. Her scales were surprisingly soft against his skin, her body temperature cooler than human norm yet warming with every touch. What began as curiosity transformed into passion as they discovered each other's bodies, differences becoming points of fascination rather than barriers. Afterward, lying together in the strange blue light of Veldari's moons, Thomas traced the pattern of scales along her shoulder. Where does this leave us? Before Ilara could answer, an urgent message arrived. The king requested their immediate presence. As they dressed hurriedly, Thomas caught sight of Dravik in the corridor, watching them with calculating eyes. The trade negotiations with the Terran delegation are failing, King Zorkeleth explained, his voice weaker than when Thomas had first met him. The assassination attempt had taken its toll. They distrust our intentions. Thomas studied the proposed agreement displayed on the crystalline screen. These terms are different from what Earth's Council authorized, he observed, pointing to specific clauses. Someone has altered them to create conflict. The king's eyes narrowed. Are you certain? I worked on the original infrastructure proposals before coming to Veldari, Thomas confirmed. These modifications would give your mining guilds access to restricted Terran technology. Earth would never agree to this. Ilara placed a protective hand on her father's shoulder. Who would benefit from sabotaging these negotiations? The answer came sooner than expected. That night, returning from the archives where he'd been researching the original treaties, Thomas was ambushed in a darkened corridor. The blade sliced across his chest before he could react, but years of working in dangerous mining conditions had honed his reflexes. He managed to disable his attacker and call for guards. As royal physicians treated his wound, Ilara burst into the medical chamber, her crest fully extended in alarm, a rare display of emotion for a Veldarian royal. Who did this? She demanded, her voice shaking. The assassin wore guild insignia. Thomas winced as medication was applied to his wound. But something felt off. He was too well trained for a simple guild member. While recovering, Thomas used his engineering expertise to bypass security protocols on the palace communication system. What he discovered confirmed his suspicions. Encrypted messages between Dravik and representatives of a rival alien faction, the same ones who had attacked the mining colony. They're using our marriage as propaganda, Thomas told Ilara as she changed his bandages. Claiming it weakens the royal line and threatens Veldarian purity, Ilara's scales darkened with anger. Dravik has always been ambitious, but this is treason. The question is, Thomas said, taking her hand, do we fight this together? Or would your position be stronger if I stepped aside? Ilara's response was to press her forehead against his. an intimate Veldarian gesture of commitment. My position is strongest with you beside me. We will face this threat as one, even if it means defying your traditions? Perhaps, she said, her eyes meeting his. It's time for new traditions. Later that night, as they formulated their plan, their lovemaking held a new urgency, a passionate affirmation of their bond against the forces seeking to tear them apart. Thomas marveled at how her scales shimmered with bioluminescence in moments of pleasure, while Alara was fascinated by the warmth of his skin against hers. In my language, she whispered afterward, we have a word for when two different elements combine to create something stronger than either alone. What's the word? Thomas asked. A cavalith, she replied. It has no direct translation, but it means strength born of difference. The royal council chamber fell silent as Thomas and Alara entered side by side. 24 of Veldari's most powerful nobles and officials sat in tiered seats, with King Zor-Keleth presiding from his crystal throne. Dravek stood at the center, having just presented his case against the human Veldarian union. How convenient, Dravek sneered, that the human arrives just as we discuss his unsuitability. Actually, Thomas replied calmly, we're here to discuss your treason. Before Dravek could respond, Thomas activated a projection device displaying the encrypted communications for all to see. These messages show advisor Dravek collaborating with the Cracks Federation, the same faction that attempted to assassinate the king. Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber as Thomas continued. The attack on the mining colony was engineered to eliminate King Zor-Keleth, with Dravek promising mining rights to the Cracks in exchange for their support in his bid for power. Preposterous. Dravek's scales darkened with rage. This human fabricates evidence to secure his position. Alara stepped forward. The evidence is authenticated with royal encryption keys. Furthermore, the assassin who attacked my intended has confessed to receiving orders from you, Dravek. As royal guards surrounded the advisor, he made a desperate lunge toward Thomas with a concealed weapon. Thomas reacted instantly, deflecting the attack while Alara moved with surprising speed to subdue Dravek herself, her combat training evident in every precise movement. I protected you, Dravek hissed at the king as he was restrained. Your bloodline would be contaminated by this creature. King Zor-Keleth rose slowly from his throne. You speak of blood purity while plotting with our enemies. Thomas Hayes has shown more loyalty to Veldari in months than you have in decades. He turned to the council. The marriage will proceed as planned. 3 days later, Thomas stood in the Grand Temple of Veldari, wearing ceremonial armor crafted to honor both his human heritage and his new place in Veldarian society. The ceremony blended traditions, Earth's exchange of vows with Veldari's ritual of scale touching, where Alara's luminescent scales briefly merged their pattern with the ceremonial markings painted on Thomas's skin. 2 worlds, 1 bond, the High Priestess declared as she wound a crystalline cord around their joined hands. Different in form, united in spirit. As they completed the rituals, King Zor-Keleth approached them, his strength visibly returning. What began as payment of a life debt has become something far more valuable, he announced to the gathered dignitaries from both worlds. A bridge between our peoples. The celebration lasted well into the night, with Thomas and Alara finally escaping to the private wing that would serve as their quarters. Through the panoramic windows they could see both Veldari's moons, and, in the distance, the blue dot of Earth. Does it feel strange? Alara asked as they stood gazing at the stars. Being bound to someone so different from yourself? Thomas took her hand, feeling the cool smoothness of her scales against his warm skin. Different, yes. Strange, no. Sometimes the greatest connections form across the widest divides. Ilara's scales shimmered with emotion as she pulled him close. The ancient texts speak of souls that find each other across impossible distances. Perhaps they weren't just stories. Their embrace silhouetted against the starscape, human and Veldarian, so different in form, yet joined by something universal, represented not just a personal union, but a new chapter in interstellar relations as Thomas's lips met Alara's in a tender kiss. He reflected on how saving one life had changed everything. What began as an unexpected duty had transformed into a bond stronger than tradition, more powerful than politics, and as vast as the universe that had brought them together. In the morning, they would begin building their shared future. Two worlds united by love that had defied every boundary and expectation, proving that even across the stars, hearts could find their perfect match.